Well, hey everybody, West McDonald here, and I want to thank you for tuning in to another episode of TigerTube. And if you can't see us, that means you're listening in at Tigerpaw Radio, so thank you very much for tuning in there as well. You notice I got my game shirt on today. One of my favorite games of all time is Centipede, and that's because today we are going to be talking about gamification. And I was actually watching somebody play a certain game, which you can see the name of in the background there, Red versus Blue. And it completely fascinated me. And I'm not going to give any more than that away. Lucky to have Clint Bodungen on today. And Clint, I always let my guests introduce themselves because nobody knows you like yourself. So please introduce yourself to our audience.
Hi, thanks for having me. And I would argue that my wife probably knows me better than myself. So I've been in, whether you want to call it InfoSec, cybersecurity, system security, whatever nomenclature, acronym we want to call it, this decade. We've been doing that since about, let's just call it for more than 25 years. And I started in the Air Force where it was kind of an additional duty. Back when I was in the Air Force, we didn't have computers on every desk, and we still had token ring networks with BNC connectors and twisted pair so that's where I kind of got my start. But when I got out of the Air Force, I worked for a small ISP there, and really didn't get my I would say true start in cybersecurity really in the industry. I faked it up until the point where I got in a contract job with Symantec, where I got to write code for their IDS. I was an SQA analyst, and I started out testing their IDSs, and then eventually got to write some code for their IDSs and things like that. So that's where I got my true start. And the rest after that is kind of a hodgepodge of doing services. I got started in industrial cybersecurity, cyber risk management, cybersecurity, whatever you want to call it. I've got some opinions on that, but I started that in 2003. And have pretty much been doing that exclusively for my entire career. I've got to work with or for, or in some capacity for pretty much every oil and gas company and major, I guess let's call it pretty much every major oil and gas company and a lot of electric utility over the course of the last several years, doing mostly red team work, consulting and things like that. And then somewhere along the way, I was the lead author of Hacking Exposed Industrial Control Systems. And that's why I've got that so narcissistically put in over my shoulder there in the background. And then I, which we'll get into, creating Red versus Blue.
Yeah, which is wonderful. And the first time I saw it, it was actually Matt Lee from PAX 8. I just tuned into LinkedIn one evening, checking out my my stream, and there he was live. And I was like, what's he doing live this time of day? And, tuned in and watched him actually playing. And it just struck me as such an interesting way to get across education about these different threats that are continuing to evolve. And when I went on your website and started looking at things about how, and I'll let you get into explaining what it is, but that it's not just for cybersecurity experts, that it can be used for other folks to get more familiar with what's going on out there as well. So let's talk about that. You can also see the red versus blue sign in the background there. And it is one of the most interesting uses of gamification that I've seen so far for training. So can you please explain how you actually got into gamifying this? Like, what was the inspiration?
Yeah, back around 2013, we were doing training we're creating training courses for ICS OT cybersecurity training. And we wanted just a better way to provide feedback than just the HMI screens or just regular command line readouts. So we were wanting to create actual process environments and wondering how to replicate process environments rather than just put a PLC and some blinking lights on a table, because that didn't scale well. We're trying to figure out how to do it remotely. And we just had the idea that gaming engines and modern gaming technology replicates that stuff really well. I mean, there's one version of Grand Theft Auto where you can run around and literally shoot up in a power plant, or a substation. And we're sitting there going, well, that's it right there. I mean, if you can blow up a power station and Grand Theft Auto, why can't we do it, for training? And so we started down the road of learning how to create we became game programmers, and we learned how to develop gaming environments where we could replicate these things. And at one point, we actually had a full process environment where you can control it with real world PLCs and things like that. And there just really wasn't a use case for that. And at that point, it wasn't gamification. At that point, it was using gaming technology to simulate environments. And the use case wasn't there. But one day, Michael Farnham, who was one of the co-founders of HughesTechCon, came to me and he says, because I'd been doing red versus blue training for a while, or red team versus blue team. And he says, hey, can you come and do a red team versus blue team training for HughesTechCon? I'm like, sure. Can you do it in one day? Huh. Like, are you kidding me? You want me to do a red team versus blue team training in a single day? And I thought about it, and I went to my one of my co-founders, Aaron, who's my lead developer, and I said, hey, would it be possible to do something? We took reference from Kaspersky's Kips at one time, which is a board game. And I said, could we do something like Kips, but make it red team and blue team and just make it strategic and real high level? So we can't teach red team, blue team techniques at that detailed level in one day, but we can make it like Risk for or a board game or a card game, like, and we still get the point across. And you're like, yeah. So we created an alpha in 8 weeks and presented it at the training there at HughesTechCon, and it was a success. People went nuts over it. There were people from different universities and everything. They're like, you should do this. And so thus began. That's how we got into gamification. And really, it's game-based simulation training. Gamification is really kind of taking points and badges and stuff and added that to anything. And so what we are doing is actually game-based. We're actually using a computer game to teach cybersecurity. So that's how it happened, and the rest is history.
Yeah, I love it. And it reminds me of, like you said, Risk, right? Which is game that the longer you play it, the more you can take over, and kind of the richer the experience gets, right?
Yep.
And certainly for users, I know that when you look at a lot of the incidents that happen in cybersecurity, a lot of it is duping users, right? A lot of it is, getting people to give up credentials or to click things they shouldn't, kind of, et cetera, right? So maybe you can talk a little bit about how the game actually helps with that. Like, what does it actually address? What's a game look like?
Yeah, so we actually have two kind of models in mind when we developed it, and one was the beginners, the people who want to get into cybersecurity, the people, because what this really does is it really helps, because it's so high level and it's point and click, right? There's no command line stuff. It helps anyone of any skill level with no prior experience put together the concepts or reinforce the concepts that they're learning in a class or something like that, right? And so that's one thing. It introduces at the very beginner levels, what all these concepts are. So perfect example, my wife, who only knows enough cybersecurity through osmosis or when I talk in my sleep, and had not known anything about it. She's a computer user. She's a typical office end user, and was playing the game. And after a couple hours, was coming to me with questions like, so at what point does the cost benefit ratio turn over or flip from doing your vulnerability assessments versus implementing your threat monitoring, and and she's talking like a CISO. And I was like, that's it. That's the point right there, is that, so from an end user perspective, now we do have some other modules and things like that we're doing to differ in the end user space, because most end users don't necessarily need this broad cybersecurity program perspective, but the way that companies purchase end user whatever, that doesn't fit the paradigm. But if my wife can learn cybersecurity to that level just by playing the game, then it works very well for the end user perspective. And that's how it works, because you're playing a game and you're learning these concepts and you're learning the big picture and how they fit. So even though the industry would say, well, it's not really the typical paradigm of an end user awareness training, it actually does work for that. And then the other end is obviously just, IT professionals or cybersecurity professionals, because this helps you get the big picture. This helps you understand how a cybersecurity program works, all the correlations of how you counter vulnerabilities. But I think the biggest thing is, and why this works and how this works, is the red team, blue team aspect, right? Cybersecurity isn't set it and forget it. You don't just put your cybersecurity controls out there and say, okay, I'm good, easy bake oven. You're an active adversary is constantly always trying to work against you. And so that's why it's important to have that red team, blue team. So whether it's our red team, blue team AI, or it's a human, there's always somebody working against you, just like real life. And of course, insert Sun Tzu quote here, you have to understand your adversary in order to be able to defend effectively against your adversary. So that's why we think it's important for everybody to understand the red team side so that they understand the hacker side, whether you're a blue teamer or beginner or not. So long-winded explanation, but I'm sorry.
Well, not at all. And I'll make sure I'll bug you for some screenshots afterward as well to be able to insert into the video for folks that are actually watching this. And I really do love that concept of it never stops, right? That the threat actors, that the threats out there are continuing to evolve, that they're not sleeping at the wheel. And it is not a set and forget world. And I think for users and organizations company-wide, to have a fun way to learn that and to learn what those threats look like, is just invaluable, right? Because there is nothing worse than the dreaded, training, right? Because everybody wants to train everybody on everything. So you generally have to take a day or 2 days out of your working life, right? To go sit down and, see this training or take this training, and everyone wants them to do it. So it just becomes such a frustrating experience. But to have it as a game, like to be able to actually say, no, I got a couple hours tonight, I'm gonna, just log in after dinner and, start playing around. I mean, that changes the game, right?
Pun intended, right?
Yes. Absolutely. Hey, the world is changing. I talked about the threats and the threat actors never sitting still or complacent. In your experience, what are some of the most pressing cybersecurity challenges for the year ahead, and are they being addressed in the game as well?
So first and foremost, I think that the most pressing threat for organizations is the same as it has been since the beginning, and it remains the human, the end user. And the most common threat vectors still remain the human factor, whether it's through social engineering, clickbait, watering hole attacks. It's all spear phishing, email phishing. It's still the most commonly exploited attack vectors still remain those human-based threat vectors. And we see that so prevalently because ransomware is the hottest thing right now, ransomware campaigns, and that all of your entry vectors, I think over the last couple of years, TrickBot has remained the most common entry vector tool to trick users and use as a launching point, and tools like that, right, for the adversary. And because that's obviously a challenge, because there's a reason why that's still the most prevalent attack vector, because it works, and it still works. And so, I think, and yes, it's addressed in the game, because in the game we have elements in there like implement security awareness training, implement your basic blocking and tackling, do all these things, implement upskilling, your cybersecurity skills training. And then you see that reflected through the game on how it counters social engineering. So in the game, as the red team, you can do social engineering attacks, spear phishing attacks, malicious USB drops, and these things. And so as you go through the game, the blue team starts to see, like, well, as I implement multi-factor authentication, as I implement, which protects users, right, from social engineering, spear phishing attacks, password attacks, these kind of things, as I implement security awareness training, you start to see how that becomes more and more difficult for the red team to pull off. And so, all of these aspects, these easy attack vectors, the low-hanging fruit, they're addressed in the game, but there's no lower hanging fruit than the end user. And it's a problem. It has been a problem, and it continues to be a problem. And, if I may, that's the reason why we, just what you said, right? Nobody wants to do the security awareness training. It's just a point and click exercise. I just have to do it. And it's the same year in, year out. And nobody really learns anything. Or if they do learn, it's just something mundane. And then you either learn and you don't care, right? You don't know how it impacts you really, because it's the company, And so, it's the company's problem, not my problem, right? And so that's the reason why we developed Red versus Blue, to make it fun, to make it interesting, to make it engaging and memorable, because, beyond the psychological impact and just the psychological reasons and scientific, backed reasons on why gamification is more effective for learning, it's just fun. And, and it makes people want to do it. And so, and I'm not saying all of this because of, because I pitch red versus blue, right? I don't sell red versus blue. I created red versus blue, and I created red versus blue because this is what I believe, and so yeah, that's the main problem, is the end user, and it's going to be a challenge until we change the way that we address that through different training and making it, I guess, memorable, and make it stick and make it impactful and immersive for the end user.
I love it. And, that's the thing. We are a world of people, and that's what companies are made of, right? So the people aren't going away. So, the education has to, continue to evolve. And I love this idea of just making it fun, right? Why can't
Yep.
we enjoy the experience? So kudos to you on that. Hey, we're at that point in the interview now. I call it the impossible question. So if you only had one piece of advice that you could give to providers when it comes to cybersecurity for their customers, what would that be?
That's pretty easy. I kind of already sort of addressed that, which is, find a better way. And again, this is not a sales pitch. This is what I truly believe. That's why I do this. It's find a better way to train your end users in a way that works. And I don't care if you use red versus blue or not. Yet red versus blue is one single way. And I think red versus blue is not the only way, right? I mean, if you want to upskill your users out there, you have companies out there that use games as training. So, you have Circadence, which is a game-based CTF style. You have World of Haiku that just came out, which is a cyberpunk video game that teaches. And again, all these are more command line tools. These are more for upskilling the hard skills, but gamification and game-based learning is on the rise. And I say, just explore the world out there, explore the world of options for training, step outside of the box and do something different than your stupid, typical end user awareness training and campaigns and PowerPoint slides and quarterly emails and messages. And, even phishing campaigns are great, right? I mean, so the phishing training out there, which we don't do, and I'm saying do it, get somebody to do that kind of thing. It's great, but that's not the only thing, right? Phishing emails and campaigns and those sort of automated programs, even if they're gamified, they're not the only thing, right? There's a whole multitude of different ways to train your end users, but I think it's important to make sure your end users want to do it. It's not just, I'm gonna click through the same videos over and over again. Make sure it's interesting for your end users. You need to immerse them in a situation so that they're emotionally involved with the context, and so that it's memorable. When you connect emotion with the context, it makes it more memorable. That's how our memories work. And if you think about it, anytime, your most prevalent memories you have are tied to some strong emotions usually.
Yeah.
And so you need to immerse and involve your end users in something emotional with and you don't even have to pay for programs to do this, right? You can create exercises yourself and create your own games if you want. They're perfect one thing that's really fun, and there's a free version. It's called crowdpurr.com. I think it's with 2 R's. Crowdpurr.com lets you create your own custom, like, game night style trivia and Jeopardy and stuff like that. Even stuff like that, where you just have cybersecurity questions in the form of trivia, and you get everybody in a room, maybe do a lunch and learn and make it fun. So there's tons of different ways out there, not just red versus blue, to gamify your learning experience. And I think once you do that, you're going to make it more memorable. Their learning retention is going to be there. And then finally, you have to make users care. You have to make them okay, great, it was fun, I know this, but you know what? It's a pain in the butt to do this 2-factor authentication thing. It's a pain in the butt to not click this or whatever. You have to make the users care about, why does it matter to them? And so by putting them in an immersive story, well, maybe in the way that we do it, red versus blue, is we make them responsible for cybersecurity. We make the end user responsible for cybersecurity, so that you see that when your actions, and basically we can do is guilt for the most part, is like, you know what, you failed. Look, you got your company hacked and all this stuff like that. But at least maybe they see the broader picture of, like, my individual actions affect the company in this way. And so it's all of those factors, I think, is kind of how you solve it, at least in my microcosm.
I love it. That is great advice. And in respect, obviously, for your time, I want to thank you very much for doing the interview today. And if you could, I know that folks are going to be wondering, where can I find red versus blue?
ThreatGen.com. It's real simple. So here's a hint. It's and I guess you'll have a link in the comments or the link in the and everything like here, but it's easy to find. ThreatGen, GEN.com. And also the game is available on Steam. It's a consumer version, so it's not feature rich like the pro version, but the game is available on Steam. Just search for ThreatGen on Steam.
Okay, that's wonderful. And again, cannot thank you enough. And for everybody that is tuned in today for another episode, either on TigerTube or on Tigerpaw Radio, we can't thank you enough. There's lots of learning content here, so make sure you subscribe and never miss another episode. And until next time, keep learning.
Thanks.